Natural strategies for optimizing mental health. What are your options? I taught this at a high school locally recently, and the feedback afterward by multiple students and teachers was, wow, I didn't know I had options other than medications. And so this is a very important topic for everyone and anyone interested because mental health issues are not decreasing, they've increased recently. So people need to be aware of options beyond medications, especially since some research shows that 55% of patients with depression are failed by antidepressant therapy. So if over half of patients aren't helped by the treatment that they believe is the only thing available to them, that can lead to further depression and frustration and anxiety because if they fail that treatment, they could feel hopeless. What else can they do? So this presentation should give you hope and empower you with knowledge to know there are many things you can do that are drug-free and very effective, as you will see. So let's first dive into a case. This is a case from my office of Marie, and Marie is a 46-year-old female at the time, and she reported lifelong anxiety and depression, and more recently had 3 years of chronic pain as well. So this was her report at her 6-week visit. This is a less than 1 minute video here.
I can't believe the lack of pain. I had gotten to where I was just in constant pain with my back.
Mhm.
It's just, I would say 90% gone now.
Awesome.
I actually, yesterday I said to my husband, my back's not hurting. I mean, I feel normal.
Yep.
All I can say is just if I can live without pain, that's all the motivation I need, you know. Even I know the long-term benefits too, but to have the pain gone, I don't need any more evidence. I have
Yeah.
the evidence that
And so you might see that and say, well, why the heck are you showing me a testimonial about pain? This is a video on mental health and anxiety and depression. So why does pain matter? And I'm glad you asked because the answer is coming.
I can't believe.
Pain definitely matters for mental health because pain is driven by inflammation, and inflammation is the primary driver of mental health issues, as you are about to learn. This is a paper from 2009, so this isn't new information that hasn't been available to be widely available to those who might seek it out for a long time. This is 15-year-old information at least. So his paper is entitled Inflammation and its Discontents, the Role of Cytokines in the Pathophysiology of Major Depression. Cytokines is a fancy term for inflammatory, for a group of chemicals that often are inflammatory, and we're talking about inflammatory molecules in this context. So let's dive in here. Patients with major depression have been found to exhibit increased inflammatory markers in the blood, which have been shown to access the brain and interact with virtually every pathophysiologic domain known to be involved in depression, including neurotransmitter metabolism, neuroendocrine function, so hormones, and neuroplasticity. Indeed, activation of inflammatory pathways in the brain is believed to contribute to a confluence of decreased neurotrophic support and altered glutamate release reuptake, as well as oxidative stress, leading to excitotoxicity and loss of glial elements consistent with neuropathologic findings in depressive disorders. Further instantiating the link between inflammation and depression are data demonstrating that psychosocial stress, a well-known precipitant of mood disorders, is capable of stimulating inflammatory signaling molecules through activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And remember, the sympathetic nervous system controls your stress response, the fight or flight. So psychosocial stress, work stress, financial stress, relationship stress, those things can drive inflammation that drives anxiety, depression. Interestingly, depressed patients with increased inflammation have been found to be more likely to exhibit treatment resistance. That is very interesting. I said a moment ago that there's research suggesting that 55% of patients are failed by antidepressant therapy. Well, might those patients that are failed be more inflamed than the patients that don't fail with antidepressant therapy? Huh. And if so, then wouldn't eliminating inflammation be the key to their depression? Let's see, moving down. Inhibiting inflammation and their signaling pathways may improve depressed mood and increase treatment response to conventional antidepressant medications. So there it is. If we can lower inflammation, that will improve people's response to the medications. But I would take it a step further. If we can identify and eliminate the inflammation, then we don't have depression and don't need the medication. That should be the clinical goal. So I know that was a mouthful, but here's a picture showing you everything I just read to you. And let me lay it out for you here so that it is digestible. Let me get a nice color for you. So let's go with pink here. All right, so this is the brain, looking at it from the side view. So we have brain and we have brain stem. And what you see here is stress is going to activate the brain to tell the adrenal glands to make cortisol. And acute stress, in an acute stressor, cortisol is anti-inflammatory. You see it blocking NF-kappa B, which is a pro-inflammatory cytokine. NF-kappa B leads to inflammation, okay, as you can see there. So in an acute stressor, we will release cortisol to block inflammation, right? Cortisol is anti-inflammatory. In the pain context, they'll give you a corticosteroid injection, right, to help knock out the inflammation, reduce your pain. Another strategy the body can use is the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve also is anti-inflammatory. It helps put fires out. Stress also, when it activates the brain, will activate the sympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic chain ganglion in the spine, and that sympathetic chain will be pro-inflammatory, okay? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, different neurotransmitters to drive inflammation. So that's acute stress, and that's what this stuff is saying down here. But when stress is chronic, okay, what can happen is the cortisol signal, which should be anti-inflammatory and block this. Now you can develop cortisol resistance. So because you're crying wolf so often, the body gets used to hearing the cortisol and no longer listens. So what should be an anti-inflammatory stimulus now isn't listened to. So you lose that blockage of inflammation, which becomes pro-inflammatory. Okay, and that inflammation then drives brain inflammation, which will decrease monoamine levels. Okay, so that's you're losing your serotonin and your dopamine, promoting depression, anxiety, things like that. Inflammation in the brain will drive excitotoxicity, which basically you could picture as neurons blowing up. Okay, so that's going to exacerbate any neurosymptoms, anxiety, depression, migraine, seizures, etc. And the inflammation also decreases the trophic factors, so the healthy nutritive factors in the brain, like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps neurons wire together for memory and things like that. Okay, so this is a picture of what we read you earlier, but I just want to reinforce it and read the blue. Okay, because typically what we're talking about is a chronic stress scenario. So in the context of chronic stress, the influence of inflammation on cortisol receptor function may become less sensitive to the inhibitory effects of cortisol. Okay, so if you're less sensitive to the anti-inflammatory stimulus, that means you're going to be more inflamed. And this throws off the balance between inflammation and anti-inflammatory actions. Okay, so stress drives neuroinflammation, and this is the mechanism how. So we said, well, why the heck are you showing me a testimonial video on pain when we're talking about anxiety and depression? Well, because chronic pain is a chronic stressor. Chronic stress drives this loop. And chronic stress, we lose the anti-inflammatory benefit of cortisol, which then makes us net pro-inflammatory, drives brain inflammation, and now I'm anxious, depressed, sickness-type behavior, etc. So don't let pain become chronic, because that can lead to mental health disorders. moving on here. So that was the video from Marie's 6-week visit. She continued through her care, and now at the 12 weeks, she filled out the progress questionnaire so I could understand how has your anxiety and depression changed? How has your attitude changed in this time? So at 12 weeks, she reported a 100% improvement in anxiety and depression. How? Well, because we eliminated her pain, drastically reduced her inflammation. And so without an inflamed brain, she can have a clear head and a happy mood. So she reported, I am excited to say that I no longer experience anxiety and depression on a daily basis like I used to. I used to wake up depressed and frequently tearful. I went through my day with my chest feeling tight and my mind racing for no reason. It feels like a ton of bricks have been lifted off of my shoulders, and now I can just enjoy life. Everyone experiences challenges and ups and downs and things we cannot control, but it seemed I always had to battle with a cloud that used to hang over me. I spent a lot of money on counseling in the past with little results and had no idea that my mental symptoms could be related to my physical state of health. I'm so glad I resisted taking the depression and anxiety medications the regular doctors pressed me to take and instead invested in functional medicine. I'm so grateful to you for helping me feel good again. And regarding her improvement in attitude, she also reported a 100% improvement in her attitude. Again, she stated, I feel so much better physically and mentally, and therefore my outlook on life has done a 180. I had resigned myself to living in mild depression and constant anxiety because I thought it ran in my family, and there were no other options besides taking medications that I did not want to take. When I think back over my life and the lives of my family members, I am sad to realize how much needless suffering occurred. I'm telling everybody how functional medicine has changed my life, especially in mental health. There should be a huge change in how mental issues are handled to rule out physical causes before anything else is done.
I can't believe.
So, what about serotonin, though? Because aren't we taught that depression is a deficiency of serotonin? And that's why they give us SSRI medications, which stand for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Well, as we've talked about in previous videos, the serotonin hypothesis of depression or the serotonin theory of depression has never been proven. And in fact, as this paper reviews, it has been disproven. So think about that. The entire mental health, quote unquote, industry is built on a false premise of how mental health issues develop. So no wonder 55+% of people aren't helped. They're being treated in a model that's been proven to be wrong. So how much success are you going to get that way? Not a ton. So looking at this paper, if we just jump to the conclusions, right here, the paper concludes. Okay. Well, let's back up a little bit. On the top box, let's go there. It is often assumed that the effects of antidepressants demonstrate that depression must be at least partially caused by a brain-based chemical abnormality, and that the apparent efficacy of SSRI shows that serotonin is implicated. Other explanations for the effects of antidepressants have been put forward, however, including the idea that they work via an amplified placebo effect or through their ability to restrict or blunt emotions in general. We sought to establish whether the current evidence supports a role for serotonin in the etiology of depression, and specifically whether depression is associated with indications of lowered serotonin concentrations or activity. So they're putting the hypothesis to the test. What did they find? Our comprehensive review of the major strands of research on serotonin shows there is no convincing evidence that depression is associated with or caused by lower serotonin concentrations or activity. And this is a 2022 study, by the way. So that busts the serotonin hypothesis. If it's not serotonin, then what is it? Good question. And we've covered that in the past too. But before we get there, if you're interested in more information on the serotonin hypothesis and why it's not the answer and how to deal with neurological and mental health issues as relates to autoimmunity, check out my book on Amazon, The Autoimmune Answer. But if it's not serotonin, then what? This paper is going to explain it to you. This is from 2021, and this is a paper where researchers took mice that did not have depression, and they caused depression by giving them a gut infection. And what they found is when they injected lipopolysaccharide, which are bacterial endotoxins, into the guts of mice, that caused increased histamine in the brain, so increased inflammation in the brain. That histamine caused a decrease in serotonin. And they tried to treat these mice with Lexapro, or escitalopram is the other name for it. So that's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibiting drug that's commonly used for depression. And the mice with the inflammation or the inflamed brain were not helped by the Lexapro. But when they eliminated the gut inflammation or the histamine, the mice were less depressed. So this is a big time, this should be a mind blown type moment, because what they showed was that inflammation is what drives depression and the lack of serotonin, not a serotonin deficiency in and of itself. So as we said at the beginning, when I showed you the picture of the brain in the stress study, high stress, high inflammation in the brain can lead to monoamine deficiency, such as serotonin, but the serotonin deficiency is not the primary cause in that instance. That's a result of the long-term neuroinflammation. In the same vein, this study showed that serotonin goes low in an inflamed brain because of the inflammation. So again, the answer would be, well, find out what caused the inflammation and address that, and they won't be inflamed, right? So this paper shows the decreased serotonin levels are caused by increased histamine activity. Under LPS-induced histamine increase, the ability of Lexapro to help or increase serotonin was impaired. A functional decrease in histamine production boosts the ability of Lexapro to work. So again, they're saying Lexapro didn't work in the context of inflammation. If we decrease the inflammation, the Lexapro worked better. Well, again, they're still treating the symptom, right? Look at this. Extracellular serotonin is lower after systemic LPS. So what that means is after they gave them a gut infection, caused systemic inflammation that then caused brain inflammation, yes, serotonin went down, but it wasn't low serotonin as the primary cause of the depression. It was the gut infection in this case. So they then say, whoop, I crossed it out for you here, but this was the not intelligent conclusion they came to. Our work implies on a functional chemical level that it is not yet time to give up on SSRI therapies, particularly in the context of elevated inflammation, but rather to consider this treatment in tandem with agents that block the ability of histamine to diminish serotonin release. So these are scientists, supposedly smart people, right? But the conclusion they drew was, okay, since the Lexapro doesn't work, we should add other drugs to lower the histamine to allow the serotonin drug to work. And it's like, no, people, that is not the intelligent decision. What they should do is say, the Lexapro isn't working because histamine is high, driving inflammation in the brain. What caused the high histamine in the brain? They should know that answer because they did it themselves. It was injecting bacterial endotoxins in the gut of the mice that caused the brain inflammation. They literally gave the mice a gut infection. So why not eliminate the gut infection? Then you don't need serotonin or any other medications because you've eliminated the inflammation and the mice are no longer depressed. So always think about cause first, right? Don't try and treat the symptom. Identify and eliminate the cause, which in the context of what we're talking about today, mental health issues, you need to identify and eliminate any and all causes of neuroinflammation. And I've made a more in-depth video on that paper in the past. You can check that out on my YouTube channel by typing in the title of the video. What about the gut? Okay, so we just saw when they injected an infection in the gut of mice, the mice became depressed. How does that happen? Well, we saw brain histamine increases and you have more brain inflammation, but how did what was going on in the gut actually impact the brain? That's done and answered by the gut brain gut axis, specifically the vagus nerve, which is the connection point for this, for the gut brain gut axis. So, quickly, the vagus nerve represents the main component of the parasympathetic nervous system, which oversees a vast array of crucial body functions, including control of mood, immune response, digestion, and heart rate. The vagus nerve establishes one of the connections between the brain and the GI tract and sends information about the state of the inner organs to the brain. The vagus nerve is an attractive target in treating psychiatric and gastrointestinal disorders. Vagus nerve stimulation is a promising add-on treatment for treatment refractory depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and inflammatory bowel disease. Increasing vagal tone inhibits inflammation. So if we can increase vagal tone, we can inhibit inflammation. And remember, inflammation drives mental health disorders. So both are important mechanisms of resiliency. The stimulation of the vagus afferent fibers in the gut influences monoamine brain systems in the brainstem that play crucial roles in major psychiatric conditions such as mood and anxiety disorders. There is evidence for gut bacteria to have beneficial effect on mood and anxiety, partly by affecting the activity of the vagus nerve. Vagal tone is correlated with the capacity to regulate stress responses and can be influenced by breathing. Breathing's free. So how many people who are being prescribed Lexapro or other SSRIs are also being taught to use breathing exercise to improve their vagal tone? Close to zero, probably. So vagal tone can be influenced by breathing. Its increase through meditation and yoga likely contribute to resilience and mitigation of mood and anxiety symptoms. So what does that look like? Here's a picture. Okay, so you have here, we have the vagus nerve here, which all three of these are the vagus nerve. It's branches, okay, and you can see here 90% of the vagus nerve fibers go from the gut to the brain, telling the brain about inflammation in the gut, how hungry you are, if you're full yet, and other energy metabolism goings ons in the gut. 10% of vagus nerve fibers come from the brain to the gut to help release stomach acid and digestive enzymes. Okay, so the vagus nerve is constantly sending information to the brain. And if you've got inflammation in the GI for any reason, infection, lack of probiotics, food reactions, all that, that inflammation can make it to the brain and drive psychiatric and mental health disorders. So the vagus nerve and the gut become important. How many people have been to a psychiatrist, been given mental health medications, and had their gut checked? Close to zero, probably, because they're not looking at the brain gut brain axis. They're just slinging psychiatric medications. We need to do better. So here's another patient at 6 weeks, and here's her video. This is Vivian. She's a 37-year-old female with anxiety, depression, and depersonalization since 2015. That's tough because depersonalization is kind of like you're in your body, but you don't know yourself. Okay. Let's see what she has to say.
I'm just so thankful, really, because I'm not, even though I'm not like, exactly where I want to be, I feel like just having that relief of the depersonalization going down, like, I don't know, I just felt like absolutely crazy. And then even though I'm going through a lot of stress, like, I still feel like I'm much more resilient than I would have been. Like the fact that I'd have to take Ativan every single night just to calm the freak down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I've even been doing things that I usually never would do, like go on lots of play dates or schedule lots of other things that I would do normally not do, so, like, because I would be too scared or anxious or whatever. So I feel like that's a good thing, So that was my main goal, basically, was to not have to get on psych meds and such.
So how do we do this? How do we take patients who had seen psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, tried the meds, done everything that the mainstream system can offer them and not improved. How can we take them and improve them in 6 weeks or less? Glad you asked. The way to do that is, again, to seek out cause, right? Find and address the cause. And the causes are legion. So there's no medication that will address every cause of neuroinflammation. There's no counseling that can address every cause, because counselors or therapists aren't looking for physiologic drivers to your mental health issues. So we need to assess the entire person, not just hear their symptoms of anxiety or depression and assume we know it's coming from the brain or the psychology. As Marie said in her testimonial, she was wowed by how much physical health can impact mental health. Well, the therapists aren't looking at your physical health, and neither are the psychiatrists. We can, and we can address it naturally. So what's available to us to do that? Nutrition and nutrients. This paper is looking at the role of nutrients in neurotransmitter signaling as regards to depression, PTSD, and suicidal behaviors. So if we look at a graphic from this paper, we can see here a lot is going on, okay? The black part is a neuron, okay, so inside a nerve in the brain. And the red arrows are things that are going to drive inflammation. The green arrows are things that will block the red arrows from happening. So if you follow the red arrows all the way down, you see it leads to excitotoxicity, death of the neuron, blocking neurotransmitter signaling, things that will cause mental health issues, anxiety, depression, autism, seizures, migraine, brain fog, etc. But, we're talking about nutrients and mental health. So look, what are in the green boxes? Vitamins, folate, vitamin B12, fish oil, vitamin C, zinc, magnesium. All of these nutrients play key roles at blocking certain pathologic mechanisms in the process. So if you don't have a healthy diet and you don't have healthy nutrition, healthy supplement, nutrient levels through supplementation, you're at increased risk for mental health disorders. Now, this matters if it matters. And I know that sounds silly, but remember, we said there's lots of causes of mental health disorders. So if your mental health disorder is driven by chronic pain, then maybe B12 won't help you unless you have chronic pain and deficiency in B12. So I'm not saying B12 is the answer to everybody, but I'm saying if you're deficient in B12 and you have mental health disorders, it's likely that your B12 deficiency is driving that through multiple mechanisms. So we want to replete your B12 or get your B12 status to optimal and observe for you. That might be the ticket, right? Because Lexapro is not giving you B12. So if you're depressed and Lexapro and you're depressed because you have a B12 deficiency, you can take all the Lexapro in the world and you'll never feel better because it's not giving you any B12. Same thing for if you're missing DHA from omega-3 fatty acids, or you're missing zinc, or any one of these. So each case is different, but the detective work has to be done to understand, is this person depressed because they're deficient in nutrients? Are they depressed because they're in chronic pain, which is driving neuroinflammation? What is behind this person's depression? So those nutrients matter. Another nutrient that is a big player is vitamin D. And as you can see in this study, vitamin D is a potent regulator of dopaminergic neuron differentiation and function. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that drives motivation, that drives goal setting, that makes you want to get up in the morning and go after, partake in the world. Dopamine is that feel-good neurotransmitter. So anything that feels good that you want to do more of, that's a dopamine hit. Well, guess what? You need vitamin D for dopamine function. And so if you're lacking vitamin D, you may lack optimal dopamine physiology and now be apathetic and unmotivated and not get any joy out of life. Well, that can't be very common, can it? Well, only 70% of the US population. As you can see here, and we talked about 2 weeks ago, vitamin D levels are inadequate in 70% of the US population. So if 70% of the US population has inadequate vitamin D, might that percentage have inadequate dopamine? All right. So what are we seeing? We're seeing increased levels of mental health issues, and the large majority of the US population doesn't have enough vitamin D. So might vitamin D be a simple, safe, ineffective strategy for some people with mental health disorders? Vitamin D might be the ticket. Again, inexpensive blood test, inexpensive to get vitamin D, and raise your levels as necessary. Next on the list, gut health and mental health. We saw the vagus nerve study above. This is another one talking about leaky gut and leaky brain. Gut inflammation and leaky gut can lead to brain inflammation and leaky brain, and they're using a celiac disease example in this study. But again, the connection there is the gut to the brain. And we talked about in the gut is the gut microbiome. So this paper is telling you or discussing how in the gut microbiome we have probiotic species. Probiotics are beneficial bacteria that can be viewed as the allied forces of our immune system. They promote anti-inflammatory response in the gut. They'll mount pro-inflammatory responses against bad bugs. They produce certain vitamins and nutrients for us. They nourish the colon. They have all kinds of positive roles in the gut. This paper is showing you they also have positive roles outside the gut, specifically in the head. And the probiotics that positively influence the brain are called psychobiotics. And the paper says psychobiotics can efficiently alleviate the symptoms of several nervous system disorders, such as autism, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, insomnia, depression, diabetic neuropathy, and anorexia. So again, how many people are going and getting Lexapro and also having their gut assessed and being given psychobiotics if they're lacking? None in the conventional model. So again, think about the gut. That might be a ticket in your case. And again, here's that image of gut brain gut connection. Vagus nerve is a big time player in that connection. How about light? Light plays a big role in mood and brain function, specifically exposure to sunlight and natural light. And because we're human beings that have co-evolved with the sun, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, woke up with the sun, motored down when the sun went down, danced around the fire for a couple minutes, then went to bed, and then back up with the sun. So our body functions on a circadian rhythm that matches the circadian rhythm of the sun. So if you're sleeping poorly, or you're going to bed too late, getting up too early, or say you're a nurse and you're working third shift and you've totally inverted that circadian rhythm, that drives inflammation, poor insulin sensitivity, poor immune response, all kinds of issues. So we need to have proper light exposure and proper circadian rhythms. If you look at the middle of the page there, it says circadian disruption alters the function of brain regions involved in emotion and mood regulation. This occurs through direct neural input from the clock genes or indirect effects, including altered neuroplasticity, neurotransmission, and clock gene expression. So here's an image from the study showing that, hey, the eye takes in the visible light spectrum from the sun, and that hits brain centers that sets clock genes and circadian rhythms, ultradian rhythms, all kinds of rhythms in our body. Different organs have different rhythms, but their clocks are set off light. So if we have poor exposure to light, if I'm never outside in the sunlight and I'm always under neon lights in an office building, then I'm going to have a dysfunctional circadian rhythm. And that can lead to a whole plethora of potential symptoms or conditions. Okay, our bodies are made to be exposed to sun and get that vitamin D, which is a Swiss Army knife for us and helps us with inflammation, against cancer, dopamine, bone health, muscle health, antiviral, all kinds of things. So we need the sun, we need the light exposure. And then we also need to not be, when the sun is down, we need to not be looking at blue light devices all night long, like a TV screen or a cell phone or a computer, because the blue light is opposite of that red light and infrared light that helps us motor down and go to sleep. The blue light activates the sympathetic nervous system and actually keeps us up and drives stress. So light is a big time player. This is another picture from the paper that says, too much light at night or altered circadian rhythms drives depressed mood and issues with learning and memory, cognition, and the stress response. What about therapeutic light? Oh, before I go there, I have made a video in the past on how shift work and circadian rhythm dysfunction literally is killing you. Check that video out on my channel if you like, where I walk you through a case example of a nurse who the first 6 weeks I worked with her, she improved big time and she was working day shift. Then literally at the 6 week point, they switched her to night shift. And so at her 12-week retest, we had 6 weeks of night shift labs and everything went backwards, more inflamed, basically killing her. So this is real. Check that out if you're interested. We can also use therapeutic light in anxiety and depression. What is therapeutic light? Well, wavelengths that are near infrared and red. So lasers, low-level laser therapy. We can use light from those wavelengths to improve your mental health. This study is using 810 nanometer laser, which is near infrared. And so what they did was they took depressed subjects and they exposed them to laser, and they found our results demonstrated that near infrared had an anti-anxiety and antidepressive effect, which is probably linked to increasing serotonin and decreasing nitric oxide levels in certain brain areas. Okay, so that's one paper. Here's another one. Laser with near infrared light for generalized anxiety disorder. This was anxiety patients. They used laser. They used it for 8 weeks for 20 minutes a day on the forehead. Okay, so near infrared light, 8 weeks, 20 minutes a day on the forehead. Importantly, no serious adverse events. Okay, so if you take Lexapro or some other SSRI, there's a big long list of side effects, including suicidal behavior. You use laser, no serious adverse events. Okay, so this is safer and it's very effective. Conclusion: laser with near infrared is a promising alternative treatment for generalized anxiety disorder. 20 minutes daily for 8 weeks. Here's another paper using near infrared laser for anxiety and depression. Okay, the transcranial use of laser improves brain activity and may clinically decrease anxiety and depression. So these things are all the rage now. The ladies on that are viewing this video may be familiar with red light and near infrared light because there's a lot of products, panels, masks, and things you can wear now to help with skin. It's being marketed heavily for skin health. But as I've talked about many times on this channel, red light and near infrared light lasers are very useful for a whole list of chronic conditions and inflammatory conditions, and for driving energy production and health. Exercise and mental health. This paper looked at 1.2 million people in the United States to see how is exercise associated with mental health. And what they found is exercise is significantly and meaningfully associated with self-reported mental health burden. And what they found was the largest associations were seen for popular team sports. So if you're playing team sports, that'll help you. Cycling, aerobic, and gym activities. So those were the couple things that yielded the couple forms of exercise that yielded the best results for people 18 and older with mental health issues. And specifically, this study said 45 minutes, 3 to 5 times per week yielded those significant benefits. A more recent study that we've covered in another video was published this year, 2024, in the British Medical Journal, entitled Exercise for the Treatment of Depression. And I'll point you down to the red highlight there. They said the effect of exercise appeared superior to antidepressants. The effect of exercise appeared superior to antidepressants. So again, If you're not exercising, maybe you should try that before going on an antidepressant medication. These authors found that walking or jogging, yoga, and strength training appeared to be the most effective types of exercise. Well, there's something there for everyone. If you like weights, great. If you like walking, great. If you like yoga, great. If you like jogging, great. Basically, get moving. It all helps. And what's really cool for the nervous system is this concept called spatial summation, which is essentially stacking of therapies. So if you're exercising, that's going to help you. Then you can stack on other things that have been proven to help. Well, what if you exercise out in the sun? That's going to be even more helpful. Why? Well, because you're exercising, you're getting vitamin D, and you're getting the infrared light from the sun. So you're helping your circadian rhythm. That's three things. What if you're doing all of that in a green space like the woods? Now you're doing what's called forest bathing, and you're getting parasympathetic relaxation activation that way. What if you're doing all four of those things and you're barefoot in that green space? Now you're exercising, you're getting vitamin D, you're getting the infrared light, you're getting green space and oxygen, and you're grounding. So big time potential improvement in your mental health. And guess what? That was free. All of that. There was not one penny spent to do any of that. Wonder why they're not telling you about it. So there's a lot more to discuss. If you want to learn more, again, you can check out my book on Amazon. And relevant to this topic specifically on my YouTube channel, where I have over 1,100 videos, I have a playlist specifically with videos, over 100 videos on just anxiety, depression, and brain inflammation. So know that you are not hopeless if the medications have failed you. You're not hopeless at all. There's tons of hope for you. It's just you have to find a practitioner that's going to do the detective work to figure out specifically in your case, what are the factors that matter and what are the strategies that will be most effective for you.